Hey, this is StarCraft 2 History, Part 17. This one is going to talk about what I consider to be the third generation of champions and a final miracle, which is the end of, or what I consider the end of MVP, the final great miracle of his career. So, this one starts at the beginning of Heart of the Swarm, and it actually starts at the end of Wings of Liberty. In the final GSL of Wings of Liberty, two players make it to the playoffs, and these two would end up defining the first year, in my opinion, defining the first year of Heart of the Swarm, in a sense. And these two players are Soulkey and Innovation, and both of these players are the aces of their respective teams, smaller Kespa teams, STX and Woonjing Stars. And like I said earlier, everybody thought it was going to be the S rank players that were going to define the Kespa players that are coming into StarCraft 2, but it was actually going to be the guys that are on the rise that were going to do it, and these two were on the fucking rise at the end. And Soulkey's career is actually kind of tragic in retrospect, but I'll get back to that in some later video. As for these two, basically, Soulkey loses to Tasia, and then I think Innovation loses to some Patch Zerg. They're all Patch Zergs. It might have been Symbol, or it might have been Roro. Let me check real quick. Yeah, it was Symbol who takes him out, right? So, and the reason I start there is because Soulkey was actually proving himself to be a very solid Zerg player, but majority of Zerg players were. Like, even somebody who had yet to come up to the scene, like Sue, showed himself to be pretty solid in Code A. He was actually the guy who eliminated MVP from GSL with Brutal and Fester. So there's like an ongoing joke that maybe it was Sue is cursed by MVP, but I doubt that. Anyway, going on into the first GSL, there is huge hype going around Innovation, and the reason there was so much hype going around Innovation was because, mechanically speaking, he was the best player we had ever seen in StarCraft 2, especially for Terran, but could just be any player in general. And the reason we knew he was mechanically the best player was because he had terrible micro, and he was still winning games. So it was like top, except he made so much extra shit he was winning games. And if you want, you can watch it. Basically, like he's not even A moving, he's like left clicking moving, and he clicks like stop or something, and then he attacks. And then like his units auto attack or some crazy bullshit like that. And he was doing this for a long period of time, and this was when like the disparity between his mechanics and the rest of the players was the highest. And it was an exceptional watch because soon after, unlike top, he would fix the micro problems and he'd refine his gameplay even more. And that's kind of the hallmark of Innovation's career, is the refinement of the standard game to like a high point that nobody else could really reach. So that's why I've always called him like Plato's Terran in a sense. And this guy was legitimately hyped up to be the best player in the world, and I think he was the best player in the world for like the first, at least the first third of the Heart of the Swarm part of that year, but arguably further down. And one of the reasons that's interesting about Innovation in terms of theoretical sense is he has an interview where very early on in StarCraft 2 where somebody was interviewing him in Korea. They asked him, wow, you were good in Brood War, but for whatever reason you're way better in StarCraft 2. Do you know why? And he said, this is like Innovation, a paraphrase, but basically Innovation says that's because strategically it's a much simpler game, and so he could just rely on his like mechanics. And I completely understand what he's talking about, because when you talk about Innovation, you talk about StarCraft 2, especially during this time. Innovation was a railroad worker in a sense. Like he built up a complete playbook, and not playbook, but he built up a complete plan. And he was always like the white pieces if we were talking about chess, except he always had tempo control. He was always, and this is where I'm getting all my analogies mixed up. Basically, tempo control is in a card game where you play one hand and they have to play two hands in order to counter that one hand. I guess that's how you would call it tempo control. And basically, because Innovation style was so refined, so mechanically strong, he was getting more units out faster, and he he wasn't losing units in any particular area, so he could always put on high amounts of pressure. And here's the thing about doing such pressurized attacks over and over again, is you force your opponent down a single path, and they can't really do anything about it. And that's what made Innovation so exceptional during that time. He was incredible to watch. And this was during the Hellbat era, but also into the Widowmines era, Widowmines right after that. So this was an incredible player in every respect of the word. And that's actually why I understand why he had such problems with Brood War and couldn't do, but had no problems in StarCraft 2, because in StarCraft 2 there was less counters, both strategically, tactically, and compositionally, to what Innovation was doing when you compare it to Brood War. So that's always why I found it so. That's why I could completely understand why Innovation thought this way, and it kind of reveals the way he thinks about the game. Even though I will say he's been smarter as of recently. It's not even like he was dumb back then, but it's like he's expanded his game, I guess, is the best way to put it. But I'm probably not going to go into that too much. And Innovation, like even more so, was like MLG Winter was like, yeah, he lost that to Flash, but I feel like he probably could have won that. That was like a very close series, even though he loses 1-3. And also very early on in Heart of the Swarm. And it's in GSL that we really see him get his shit together, because in round of 32, all the way to the finals, he has like a crazy fucking run, one of the best runs you will ever see in GSL, in any StarCraft 2 tournament. Actually, it's first round he loses to Rain, and then he beats Hyun. Hyun was one of the top 5 Zergs, basically. Then he beats Rain, so he's already beaten one of the best Zergs, and Rain was probably like the second best Protoss at this time, right after parting. Goes into the group of death, and the group of death has him play against Flash, second best Terran, somebody who had beaten him, and then Life, best Zerg. He gets out. So he has beaten the best Zerg, 2 of the best Zergs. He has beaten the best Terran, and he's beaten the second best Protoss, right? Then he beats Roro, another top 5 Zerg, and then he beats Symbol, another Zerg. And so he's beaten, like, among all those guys, he's beaten like 7 of them. And he's also beaten Soulkey, and I think he's beaten Rain, and I think he beat quite a few people in Pro League. Basically, by the time Innovation gets into the GSL finals, he had beaten every single named player in the top 10, in my own personal top 10. So that was fucking insane at the time. And I'll actually read you a passage of something I wrote to try to understand, because people talk about Innovation as if he's a bone draw now. No. He's very good now. And even though he has more straight up results now, I think his peak performance, and I still think its peak strength, was actually in this period in 2013, even though he doesn't win this GSL. And he was just so much more dominant. He had so many less problems in particular. And this is actually a sticking point for Innovation for the rest of his career, is like every time you think he's about to ascend to the next level of the highest plane, he kind of cracks randomly under the pressure. Like there's some small thing he fucks up, or some small thing he doesn't do, and then he kind of goes silent for a little bit. Like we're even seeing it now again in 2018, right? Like gets a perfect group in GSL, gets knocked out, loses in IEM Katowice pretty quickly too. So here's what I wrote back then, because this is, in my opinion, it crystallizes the feeling of what it felt like watching Innovation after we had seen all of that patch Zerg shit. It was the Terran Kingdom had become fully infested. The likes of Life and Roro defiled the throne that once belonged to MVP, and his castles were laid to waste by Leenock and Soulkey. No corner of the realm was left untainted, not even MKB's Solar Stool, which was taken by the Tunneler Symbol. But from the ashes of defeat rose a champion to bring a new dawn. Reborn under the waters of Yongsan and anointed on the Korean ladder, Bogus became Innovation. And before he descended upon the studios of Gangnam, he gave his last sermon, warned them all to flee now, for not a Zerg shall survive my fury. If they surrender, they may leave in peace to the lands of Europe and America. If they stay, I will have no mercy. Widowmines split open the earth, releasing the fiery bats of hell. The skies will glow black with the shadows of the medevacs, and they shall see no light but the harsh exhaust of afterburners. Mules will rain from the heavens, and they shall be deafened by the sound of concussive shells. GSL will be cleansed of the Zerg, and Terran will reign supreme once again. And, of course, like, I pretended to be Major because this Major was the guy that prophesized Innovation becoming the best player in the world. And now, for all of those great things I just said about Innovation, he loses to GSL, and this is the biggest fucking choke I have ever seen, straight up. Straight up, this is the biggest choke. There is no choke bigger than this, unless you, like, combine chokes. Like, Sue is the greatest choker, but this is, like, one of the greatest choke moment I've ever seen. So, basically, on the other side of the bracket, we go to the other guy, the other champion I put in the third generation of champions, Soulkey. And Soulkey himself was having a great run through the GSL. He beat Maru twice to get out of the round of 32, and even though Maru was underrated at the time, as we know now, he turned out to be pretty fucking good, but he wasn't that good back in the first season at least. Or maybe it was just a bad matchup, because Soulkey always had a good matchup against Maru. It's just maybe it was a matchup thing. So in round 16, Soulkey beats Yoda flying. Like, flying was pretty decent. I don't think Yoda was that good. Then in the quarterfinals and semifinals, he actually beats two very good Protosses in Parting and SOS, and both of them are very different Protosses. And so, like, SOS was doing a bunch of wild fucking shit back then. Like, he was, like, basically, like, he was doing, like, Void Ray, Charge Lot, Dark Templar, weird kind of shit. Basically, what stuff he'd do for the rest of his career. And Innovation and Soulkey would play out in the finals, and this is what happened. Innovation got a very quick 3-0, and then Soulkey reverse sweeps Innovation and wins the next 4. And a lot of it is because of Roach Baneling all-ins that Soulkey does to Innovation. And he basically, like, destroys Innovation. And the reason I call this a choke is because first of all, Innovation had done such a clean sweep that he only needed to win one of these. And when you look at Innovation semifinals against Symbol, he actually shows he can completely hold the Roach Baneling all-in. And so that's actually one of the reasons why I think Innovation choked. The other reason I think he choked is just because of the way he played. It's pretty bad. And then famously on Daybreak, like, a lot of people talk about him like loading up his army and boosting into Soulkey's base, but it runs out. The afterburner effect runs out right before the units can land, and then just runs to a bunch of mutas. And everyone's like, "Goddamn Innovation!" What they don't see is on the minimap where the other half of Innovation's army is shooting rocks in the middle of Daybreak, and then they die too without hitting a single shot towards the enemy. And so that's how you know fucking Innovation choked like a motherfucker. He choked so bad. But you know what? It turns out to be fine, because soon we go into WCS Season 1 finals, and this is basically just like a Korea show this time around. Like, in Season 2, you'd see a bunch of the guys from NA and EU turn up more to a better extent. But for the first Season 1 finals, which was like collaborative of, like, the best finishing players from WCS Europe, WCS NA, and WCS Korea, which was the GSL, they would combine into one, basically. And so it was still a very good tournament, and I put it below the GSL. Actually, I should make this clear. In terms of ranking, I've always put BlizzCon in terms of prestige as the highest, because that's the one people want to win the most. But when I actually write it down and I look at, like, the paths and the players they beat, I always end up ranking GSL a little bit higher, just because what happens is in GSL you always end up beating and playing better players. Though if it was ever the case that for whatever reason your BlizzCon run was was equal to your GSL run, I'd probably favor the BlizzCon run. So that's kind of like that's kind of like a little bit of insight into how I'm thinking about these things. But basically, MVP wins the WCS Europe against Stefano. Not that memorable of games, but people were happy because it was MVP and Stefano in the finals. People liked MVP and Stefano. And in this playoffs, basically, it kind of goes as expected for most part. Like, Soulkey and SOS play in the semifinals of the bracket. SOS wins actually this time around. It was a close series last time too, so it's not that much a surprise. And then Innovation and MVP play in the quarterfinals. And this is a great run by MVP because for whatever reason people were underrating him again. But I can totally understand why. Like, this guy had been like an year on injuries and shit. And 4GG was super hyped up as a TUT specialist, but if you just look at the record, it wasn't as impressive as it was, as statistically it looked like. That's all I'll say. You can look it up yourself. Basically, he wasn't beating what I'd consider to be the best Terrans in the world at the point. So that's why I think it was overrated. And MVP beats him pretty solidly. And then you get into the MVP versus Innovation game. And this is actually not that interesting of a series except for Game 4. Not Game 4, it's Game... let me check. Game 2? Let me check real quick. Yeah, it's Game 2. And Game 2 is absolutely exceptional. It is the game I term the final miracle of MVP. It is like his tombstone. It is his final shout that this is the best comeback game in StarCraft 2 history. It still is, because basically what happens is Innovation has everything going on his side. First of all, the meta is very much in his favor because it's like a Hellbat meta. Secondly, he gets like a 30 SCV lead on MVP in the early parts of the game, so that advantage exponentially increases over time. And so they battle out. MVP just holds on. He holds on. Like, because MVP Innovation is like constantly pressing the attack, constantly trying to probe while expanding his own army and upgrading and doing all that kind of shit. And then MVP gets to 200, but Innovation's been on 200 for a while, and he can remax, and he's basically built up this entire army. So MVP is able to make a final push straight into Innovation's base, destroy the army, and get on top of the production. And it's an insane comeback, and he wins the game. He wins that game, and it's like one of the most remarkable things I had ever seen in my life. And honestly, I don't actually think Innovation threw. That's actually what makes it so even better. Was like when I rewatched it from Innovation's point of view, it felt like Innovation was doing what he could do based off of the information he had and like the lead he had. And so nothing he particularly did was wrong. It was just like MVP was just like outthinking him the entire time, positionally and tactically speaking. And that was such an exceptional move by MVP and an incredible game. Either way, though, Innovation ends up winning, and then he kind of smashes SOS 4-0. So that actually concludes this part of... Actually, does it? Let me check real quick. I'm pretty sure this is... Yeah, this will conclude this part of the third generation of champions, just because there's going to be a lot less just because these guys don't play as much. But Soulkey ends up being the best Zerg of the year. I'll say that. Innovation, I actually think he gets exceeded by a Terran into the latter third of the year. And his name is Maru. I'll get into that later. But Innovation as a player and as a person, he kind of creates the meta. He kind of creates... Yeah, I'll say he creates like the meta in a sense. Like, he took the standard and took it all the way to its like maximum potential, and so everybody follows him. And that's also why I think a bunch of the Terrans that come after are kind of weak. The Korean Kespa Terrans specifically, just because they followed his format, but they weren't as good as him, and so they all failed. Whereas you see like a bunch of the ESF Terrans who were all stylistic, Maru, Tasia, MVP, MMA, Pult, Bomber, like these guys, like they're all more successful than the Korean Kespa counterparts, even in this era when they're like not in their primes. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that they didn't follow like Innovation's formula, because none of them, like, they understood like that was only for Innovation. It wasn't for anybody else. Like, anybody else could use it to get to a certain level of success, but they couldn't use it to become champions themselves, like consistent champions. So that's it for the third generation of champions and the final miracle of MVP. See you guys later.